Welcome to Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. I'm your host, Dr. Richard Lewis Miller. The mission of Mind, Body, Health, and Politics is to enhance your physical and emotional well-being and encourage community. I say encourage community because I believe that living in community is the richest, most effective, and healthiest way for we human beings to live. We are basically tribal animals. We enjoy being together. We enjoy doing all kinds of things together, from sewing circles to poker games to watching football games to going to theater together. One thing we love doing together is eating. We love getting together in either small or even large circles and eating together. Human beings are basically cooperative, collaborative animals. However, we must always remain aware that there are a small percentage of us who are very different, extremely different. These people are predators and dominators. These are people who, rather than have us be citizens, would have us be subjects. You can go back in history and see them in the going back to ancient Egypt, where 1%, the pharaohs, ruled 99% of the population. You can move forward in history, whether you want to go to Genghis Khan, whether you want to go to Caesar, who ended the experiment with republic in ancient Rome and turned it into an empire. Going forward, jumping a lot forward, there's Napoleon, there's Mussolini, there's Hitler. Nowadays, there's Bolsonaro and Trump. These are all people who would prefer to be dictatorial, to be tyrants. That's what they're comfortable with. They believe that the strongest, most powerful should rule the rest of us. But that's not the way the rest of us feel. When we overthrew King George and when we overthrew domination by the church, remember the kings ruled in cooperation with the church by what was called divine right of kings. They were placed there by God. So when we had our revolution, we went against not only the king, but we went against the church. But what we did accomplish was we became citizens in an experiment that we're still experimenting with called a democracy and a republic. A democracy, one person, one vote. A republic, we're all equal before the law. But we don't have that forever, folks. That's something we must maintain, we must be aware of, and we must get out and vote in order to make sure that we keep our democracy and our republic. In the words of one of my great heroes, Thomas Jefferson, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Today on Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, it's my privilege to have with us Sean Lawlor. I think Sean's coming to us from Fort Collins, Colorado. Is that right, Sean? Are
Yeah,
you
that's
there?
right, Richard.
Welcome to Mind,
Yep.
Body, Health, and Politics, Sean.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. It's really nice to be talking to you.
So tell us, what's on your radar screen nowadays, Sean? What's filling up your consciousness?
Yeah, that's a big question. Well, I think I would start with, as you were talking just there and giving that very interesting introduction about the power of the kind of power hungry, tyrannical folks, talking about King George and the divine right of the king made me think of the mentality of the colonists and in relation to the expansionism and treatment of some of the indigenous people of North America and through the idea of manifest destiny. And it was just kind of interesting to think of it as a continuation in some respects of that directed toward others. And that's just been really heavy on my mind lately, just learning more about the history of the treatment of the indigenous people of North America, particularly at this point, which essentially sprung from being really involved in the psychedelic world and, having these conversations pop up a lot. And I'm working on finishing my first book. It's going through the copy edit, and yeah, I just writing about peyote in particular, and kind of the conflicts surrounding it in the psychedelic world now,
Yes,
kind of propelled me to learn more.
your book is called Psychedelic Revival, as I recall.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
And so what you're noticing as you do your research is the connection between psychedelics and colonialism on how we treated people and we treated them in relation to their use of certain substances. Is that right?
Yeah, that was kind of the entry point, was learning about the treatment of people and their use of peyote in particular.
Yes. Well, I share that with you, Sean, because through my research and use of psychedelics over the years, the three great stains on the American character have really presented themselves to me very strongly. How we've treated the indigenous people, how we've treated people of color, and how we've treated women. Those to me are the three great stains on our character. And
Hmm.
the eradication of almost eradication, I should say. They're not completely eradicated, but we more than decimated the American Indians, haven't we?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And have you read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee?
A long time ago, yes.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that for the first time, and just some of the details of what you're talking about are pretty heavily affecting.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
much more familiar with what we did here in California, where we rounded up 10 different tribes and marched them all to one place in Northern California called Covelo. And we basically told these tribes to live together. And that was about 100 years ago. And they're still living together, but it's, it would be like taking distant strangers from 10 different states in the Union and just marching them somewhere and saying, now all live together, whether you like it or not. It was a heinous thing to do. I gather, though, that some of this education is coming to you through your study of psychedelics. And tell us,
Absolutely.
yeah, how did you begin? What brought you into studying and being involved with the psychedelic culture, Sean?
Yeah, it probably roots back to my first personal experience, which was when I was 21. I'm 35 now, so it's been a bit. And that was an experience of psilocybin mushrooms with some friends. And it was just amazing. Just an amazing day being outside while I was abroad in Australia and doing there's just a connection between travel and kind of opening my eyes to see more of the moment and be more in the moment, and more authenticity, which means a lot to me. And that's right when I started writing as well. And so I just was fascinated with them. I was fascinated with psychedelic history. And, as my life went here and there over the next decade, more or less, I was always still interested in psychedelics, but just was not aware of all that was happening at that time, more behind the scenes, but with the research and psychedelic assisted therapy, and even just the deep traditions of plant medicine use. It was kind of off my radar, and then I started to learn about it through podcasts, actually. And at the time, I was really looking to start energizing my writing career, and um, there was a local paper, or sorry, a local little magazine in Boulder that was publishing some stories about psychedelics. And so I started pitching some, and that led me to a clinic in Fort Collins that is a MAPS MDMA therapy research site. So interviewed the principal investigator there. And, I think in my life, it's been a lot about following what has a kind of aliveness to it, like what energizes me and what I feel excited about, rather than maybe a strict plan of what I'm supposed to do or want to do. And so that happened with this world of research, and it was just kind of like the rabbit hole kept going deeper. I kept learning more of research happening, results happening, and decided that I wanted to keep writing about it and also to become a psychedelic therapist. And so I applied and enrolled in Naropa University's program, their master's program in mindfulness-based transpersonal counseling, and have just kind of continued to learn more throughout that. And I finished that, and I'm doing the work now, working as a ketamine-assisted therapist.
So your first experience, as I understand it, was with psilocybin about 14
Y-
years ago.
Correct.
And what was your next psychedelic experience after that, Sean?
It was also psilocybin. It was a couple weeks later, and it was what was left of that, and it was at for a Simon and Garfunkel concert, which was kind of like the most amazing music. I just loved them, and it was probably not that much more than a microdose looking back, but I didn't know at the time.
Hmm.
And yeah, I don't know if I'd go as far as to call it a mystical experience, but it was certainly an emotional breakthrough experience. And then after that, it was LSD, about 3 years later,
Yes.
3 or 4 years
Tell
later.
us a little
Yeah,
about that.
I was I spent a couple months hitchhiking, and so I was hitchhiking around in California, and I ended up kind of reconnecting with a a guy I knew in college, and he was traveling an RV with some friends, and so we ended up in Berkeley, California, and everyone basically ended up acquiring some, and one of these guys and I went to Lake Tahoe and hadn't I we both had experienced mushrooms several times, but not LSD, and we camped and each took 2 hits of what we had acquired, and it was incredible. It was amazing. Like the evocation of the colors of the lake and the sky, like the nature connectedness was truly profound. And then we made a fire and played our guitars around the fire, and it was just a flow state in that spontaneous creation of music that I've had never experienced before. And it was just a remarkable, amazing experience that I'm super grateful for.
Can you venture a guess as to how many micrograms were in each of the two tabs that you took
Yeah, I would I would venture a guess that it was probably about 75 or so
each?
each. Yeah,
So you took about 150.
I'd estimate
Yeah,
that 150 to 200 probably.
enough to get colors changing and to feel in the flow, but not quite enough to have ego dissolution, right?
Correct.
That's
Yeah,
the
there was
that,
not ego
no, that's the
dissolution.
next stage up. You,
Yeah,
you
right.
need at least 250 or 300 for ego dissolution.
Yeah, I've never had that experience on LSD, I have to say.
Well,
S-
you have that wonderful experience ahead of you sometime.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's nice.
It's fascinating and almost indescribable, but I have found it very beneficial. It's a tremendous confidence builder because
Hmm.
the ego death feels like real death. So it's an opportunity to deal with acceptance of death as part of the life cycle rather than be afraid of it as so many of us are trained to be in our culture.
And was that difficult to reach that level of acceptance when you had that experience for the first time?
In a way, there isn't much option. You either fight, if you take enough of the medicine, you get to that point of ego dissolution where you either fight it and have a real terrible time because the medicine is so powerful, or you just accept it and lay back and let it happen. And since I knew in advance and had read about it, and I think so many people do nowadays, I would hope that the guides prepare people for that. So when you feel it coming on, you recognize that you're not really dying. When I took it for the first time, a very large dose, it was in 1965, and I knew something about ego death, having read books about it, but it still felt to me like I was really dying, and I just had to let go. And of course, I came out the other side, and I'm still here. But it felt extremely real. But again, it was also powerfully beneficial in terms of that end of life transition, which, as you know, people are now using psychedelics for end of life transitioning with anxiety and depression. I want to come to something that really was instrumental in arranging this interview, and that is that you've written an important article about the adverse effects of psychedelics. And we've been talking in the last few minutes about how we both have benefited from psychedelics. Please tell us and go into some detail about your article on adverse effects.
Sure. Yeah. Just a quick bit of context, I guess, would be that, I was coming from these more very positive, beneficial experiences and entering this world of the psychedelic research. And there was a certain point, I guess, of learning more about it and starting to feel like I was hearing more about what sounds like kind of a shadow of this world, things that are not talked about or not acknowledged, and maybe some kind of thin narratives of what psychedelics do that felt kind of agenda driven, politically motivated. And there's some phenomenon that seemed to show up in people of myself included, of at times, of like a tendency to avoid certain things that could potentially make them look bad as individuals, or a trend of an organization that could make that organization look bad. And just these examples of some pretty nasty harms being done in underground, typically underground kind of capacities, but also above ground. And so I learned about the concept of spiritual bypassing, and that just really resonated with me. This concept of using spiritual practice as a tool for avoidance, like to meditate in order to kind of section off something that's painful rather than actually working with it and kind of integrating it and forming a new ego structure kind of that is good at doing that and bypassing and walling things out. And so with psychedelics, there's such a mentality of like psychedelics make people a better people, like in general. Psychedelics make you more aware. Psychedelics are like, reaching like enlightenment suddenly and then being back down at the bottom of the hill, like 10 years of meditation in one go. And it just doesn't feel like the full picture to me, nor does it feel all inclusive, those kinds of mentalities. And I've seen and heard of people who have taken psychedelics and plant medicines to a kind of extreme and become highly destabilized and kind of lose touch with any kind of could be considered consensus reality, like in a pretty broad usage of that term, and who don't come out of it, or who just basically things that contrast those narratives. And so yeah, I just wrote an article about.
Let me interrupt you for one moment, Sean, and
Of course, Richard.
thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have more information about these specific cases? Were you able to follow up on any of them and have any specifics, like on what they took, how much they took, what happened to them afterwards, how long the negative effects lasted? Do you have anything on that, or was it more like TomTom information, coming through the TomTom system?
The TomTom system?
Where we sort of tell things to people in a text or in an email, but we don't go into detail. You just say, hey, I heard about a guy that took, 5 grams of psilocybin and he hasn't come, and you sort of hear the story, but don't know much about it, is what I'm.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on TalkRadio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
If you don't have your health, what do you really have? It's time to feel good in your body and shift from struggle to ease. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Tripp, your host of Nourish the Soul, where we explore the sacred wisdom of your body while you sit back, relax, and go on a journey of self-discovery. Join me every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to awaken your heart, transform your well-being, and unlock a deeper understanding of yourself.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
I mean, I've certainly got some information about some of these stories. One person that comes to mind, and like I also want to be kind of like sensitive with this one, because like I knew I didn't know of this person well, but I knew him, and we were in the same kind of community, and I don't know all the specifics about dosing and stuff. All I know is he was very involved in kind of ayahuasca community and doing intensive retreats with it, and became highly destabilized and ended up, I don't want to actually say the details of like what happened, but he died due to kind of living in a perpetual hallucination but like I said, I don't know how many times in a row he drank it. I don't know this or that.
Let me give you a little help here. I'm a clinician, so sometimes I want to talk about a patient on the air. So the way I do it is, like, if the patient is a male from California, then I would tell you a story with all the similar details, but it would be about a female from Tennessee. And if it was a guy in his early 20s, it would be a female in her early 30s. So in other words, I disguise the person, but I'm able to talk about the details of what they took and what happened to them. I sort of I use that as a way to preserve anonymity and confidentiality. So I'm offering
Gotcha.
I'm offering that to you as a tool as we go forward if you have other stories, because I definitely
Yeah.
respect the fact that you don't want to create any undue embarrassment for the family or for any people involved.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And let me give you one more with actual more specifics. Is that all right?
Sure, please. I want as much
Yeah.
as you have.
Okay.
This is very important stuff, Sean, and here's why. I'll give you a little context. I've been working on this psychedelic advancement for 50 years. It's
Thanks.
been
Thank
it's
you.
been a really long haul, and as you know, the substances have been illegal at the federal level for the entire 50 years. Now some cities and states are decriminalizing certain things, but we still have a long way to go. That said, we're in the middle right now of a huge renaissance, right? There's more research going on now than at any time in the last 50 years at the major universities. So I think it's very important while this renaissance is going on to let the public know of the adverse effects, to differentiate ourselves from big pharma who hide their negative effects from the public, and then the public suffer because they take things and lousy things, terrible things happen to them, and they're shaking their heads like, what's going on? Like with the SSRIs, for example. So in our case, it turns out that the adverse effects are relatively rare, but they're still important. So this is where I'm coming from and wanting to know this, and why I'm writing the book called Psychedelics Adverse Effects, so that the public knows what they're getting, what the chances are, even if they're very remote, of a particular thing happening. I think that's a very important story you just told, for example, because we do know that people are going to South America and they're taking massive amounts of ayahuasca in relatively short periods of time, right? People are going down
Yeah.
there for 2-month stays, and in a 2-month period, they're taking ayahuasca 16 times. And so there's going to be some fallout from that. And you're giving us one example. We don't know exactly what this man died of and to what extent it was related to the ayahuasca, because he died later. But we do know that he, from your perspective and what you heard, he never really came back to his what you might call normal or regular consciousness again. He got lost somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that what you're telling us?
Yeah, and yeah, it was in the midst of one of these retreats when
That he
he
actually
died.
died.
Yeah. Well, not on the medicine itself, but there's maybe a day off in
But
between.
he actually
it was
died at the
happening.
retreat center.
This is what
You've
I
heard.
heard from someone who is closer friends with him than me.
Yeah. So without revealing any more, let's go on. I interrupted you. Let's go on to the next example that you have for us.
Okay. Well, this was more above ground, I suppose, and less extreme and tragic, but still, I think, an important adverse effect. I know a person who did a ketamine therapy training, like a therapist, who did this and had not experienced ketamine before. And, ketamine experientials are parts of a lot of the ketamine trainings. I'm a strong believer in that practitioners who offer ketamine assisted therapy, it would be really ideal to have personal experience, unless there's a very strong reason not to.
Mm-hmm.
But this person, there were 2 experiences of ketamine as part of this training. One oral solution, and the other intramuscular injection. And these were 1 day apart. And I don't know exactly what this person's dose was, but typically 100 to 300 milligrams for oral solution and 50 to 100 or so for intramuscular. So somewhere probably in one of those ranges. And I think it seems she had a kind of spiritual emergence or kind of experience that followed this retreat or this training, and it continued for many months, which was a kind of just not just questioning everything, like, let me try to collect my thoughts on this. I'm finding it hard to say things without giving too much, to protect this person's
Well, we're talking about a man in
identity.
Alabama.
Right. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, we're talking about a man in Alabama that ketamine training in Alaska.
That's right.
Yeah, there was the person's this man in Alabama's spouse was very concerned, and it just this man in Alabama would end up in Tennessee or end up in Maine, like just kind of go on these long trips, and just kind of felt they were seeing into the true nature of reality, and that everything was a lie, pretty much, and like everything that it ever believed was a lie, but in a very destabilizing and unintegrated way. And anyways, it continued for about 6 months, and at this point, this person has come back, I guess, and sees their experience as a kind of spiritual emergence slash psychotic break or something close to that happened from just 2 ketamine experiences in a really good setting, a really good training setting. So that'd be another adverse effect to be aware of.
Thank you for that. So we have one with ayahuasca and one with ketamine. And what was the focus? Tell us more about the focus of this important article that you published on adverse effects.
Sure. I think it would be what I perceive as a tendency in the psychedelic renaissance, or whatever one chooses to call it, to not talk about these kinds of things, to hardly mention them. And if someone does mention them, either at a conference or a webinar or in conversations, a pattern of that person kind of getting shut down or labeled as being negative. And yeah, I think just kind of the more I talk to people in this space, seemed so many people had stories of these kinds of things, or shady behaviors, or guru, like the guru kind of facilitator vibe, like where people lead underground ceremonies and harm participants, but are still kind of like beloved in their community. And I just think there has to be a lot of avoidance for that to happen, to see blatant harms and have a reason to justify why you shouldn't talk about them or acknowledge them, either in someone else or in oneself. Yeah. I tend to I studied philosophy when I was an undergrad, so I if I'm speaking kind of vaguely and far out, that's just kind of how my mind tends to work.
I studied philosophy also in college.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Ethics and aesthetics were my main area.
Aesthetics. I had a class on aesthetics actually when I took mushrooms for the first time. It was very impactful.
So in your article where you're talking about how people are not talking about the adverse effects, and the article was published, I certainly caught my attention. Did it catch the attention of others? Are you getting some some play from it? People asking questions, raising issues?
What's kind of interesting is that article actually got published at Psychedelics Today about a year and a half to 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it got some interest, I guess. Like people were writing comments and stuff like that, but it didn't seem to like strike much. And then they republished it kind of like a month ago or whatever, when you and I got in touch.
Right.
And there was a lot more happening with that, like more people reaching out to me, more comments on the posts, it seemed. It was like I don't know, struck more in that moment than it did 2 years ago.
What do you see as the future for this? Do you think we're going to start talking more and more about the adverse effects, or will there be bulletin boards or forums or some place where people can talk openly without necessarily revealing themselves?
I do. I do think we'll talk more about it, because I think there's a much bigger push now to uh, talk about things that are outside maybe the mainstream news narrative about psychedelic therapy healing people.
Have
I
you
think
heard
so.
any stories about adverse effects from other psychedelic substances such as LSD, or even though technically not a hallucinogen, any stories about MDMA?
I think the only stories I've heard about LSD involved what sounded like a lot of use, like almost daily for like years, maybe.
Really?
For a particular individual that a very close person to me told me about. I went to college with him.
Almost daily use, huh?
Yes, almost daily use. He said he would like he'd have like a 10 strip and just kind of take bites off of it like through the day.
Wow, I'd love to interview that person.
Yeah, yeah, that would be very interesting. But my the person who told me about this person who he was friends with said he started to develop and display some schizophrenic tendencies. I don't have many details
Yeah.
about that. It's just kind of what comes up with LSD, but yeah, I think that just kind of gets at one other piece of the bypassing, which is people say psychedelics are anti-addictive, and I can see that certainly at high doses, but I think that people can develop, yeah, not physical addictions in the way of other things, but a psychological dependency on microdosing, perhaps, definitely ketamine, certainly recreational ketamine.
Yes, recreational ketamine and LSD, of course, and psilocybin work on the neurotransmitters and they wear them out. So theoretically, you take LSD several days in a row, it's not going to have much effect, after the second or third time, because you've worn out, your serotonin, and you've got to replenish it before you can get an effect again. But
Hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you a quick story about an adverse effect of MDMA going back
Please.
at least 30 years. I took MDMA with a group of psychologists. 6 of us all took it, and 5 of us had a wonderful empathetic, defenses down conversation, quite remarkable. But all of a sudden, we noticed the 6th person wasn't in the room, and we started looking around, and we found her cowering on the floor in the bathroom, and she was having a real paranoid event. And of course, we were all trained, and we were able to help her out of it, and the end result was okay. But it was definitely with a particular kind of person with her background. It was definitely an adverse effect. There's no question. It
Hmm.
was we all knew it. It was not something we had to figure out. So that's
Hmm.
just a way of saying, that these things do happen. And of course, we're all being careful as we can to vet people right now. I think eventually we'll figure out a way to provide many more people with these substances in safe ways. But right now, we're just sort of still experimenting and feeling our way across.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A lot to discover still.
A great deal to discover. we're going to take a pause now, and I'm going to ask you to give some thought to, if we ended this interview right now, and then you went off, and you had one of those moments where you said to yourself, gee, I wish I would have said so and so. You know how that is. You've had that happen where you walk away and you say, oh, I wish I would have said. So we're going to
Oh
take
yeah.
a pause now, and I'll do a little talking about the program. And that's going to give you an opportunity to see if you have any of those I wish I would have said. And then I'll come back to you, and you'll have a chance, if you have any, to say them. Okay?
Sounds good. Yeah, that's a really good question,
Okay, you think
Richard. I
about it.
appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to today's program. For those of you who may be new, if you go to our website, mindbodyhealthpolitics.org, our programs are archived and they're open source. That means you can listen to them without charge, and you can also watch them without charge. So please do go to the website, mindbodyhealthpolitics.org, and you might see a little icon there that says subscribe. And if you will, that'll help us in some way, but it doesn't cost you anything to do that. And also know that we have a new program every week, which is broadcast at 9 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Tuesday mornings. But again, you can listen to the archives anytime, any place. Now back to Sean. Any last minute tidbits?
Yeah, how much time do we have?
Well, you take the time you need. We're on internet radio.
All right. What came to mind with your question is something to do with the importance of facilitators working with their shadows and their own tendencies or propensities to bypass. And I'm certainly not excluding myself from that category. I think that it's so important in this non-ordinary state work with psychedelics and whatever it might be to hold good open space and to be a kind of clear channel of presence for someone, and maintaining authenticity and being able to be there for the breadth of participant or clients, what comes up for them in a non-ordinary state, which can be so much, as we know. And if a facilitator has certain trigger points, I mean, we all have trigger points, but some that they don't want to look at and some that they're not aware of, it's almost inevitable in psychedelic work that something will hit that. And then perhaps in the worst moment, they'll be in a reactive place and maybe not know why. And it's just such a vulnerable state to be in on psilocybin or MDMA or ketamine. And so I think it's just so important for facilitators to be able to recognize those when they're being kind of triggered and really question, like, well, what's in this for me? Why is this such a trigger? And maybe it has to do with their individual past. Maybe it has to do with culture. Maybe it has to do with values, so many things, but it's, I think, an opportunity to become more aware and maybe integrate parts of ourselves that we're still afraid to look at a bit. And it just all contributes to being a safer presence for the client and circumventing the potential to cause harm.
Well, thank you. That's a nice
You're welcome.
that's a nice tidbit. And thank you for being with us today on Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, Sean. And good luck in your work.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me, Richard. It's been really nice talking to you.
Excellent. And thank you all again, gentle listeners, for being with us today. Tune in again, as I said, 9 o'clock Tuesday mornings or any time on our archives. Until next time, this is Dr. Richard Lewis Miller reminding you that good health is worth fighting for, and it's essential for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
You're listening to Talk Radio.